Shu Kai breaks down Liv and reveals his deepest secrets, tears that shook the nation. For months, the world had been watching Shu Kai and Tan Songyun closely, not out of scandal, but out of something deeper, curiosity, love, perhaps even fear that what looked too perfect might crumble again. But no one expected what happened last night. No one expected that Shu Kai would step onto a stage built for smiles and sponsorships, and instead break down so completely that the entire nation held its breath as he revealed a lifetime of secrets, pain, and tears. It began like any other appearance. The lights were bright, the studio was packed. The host had done his usual round of charming jokes, and applause echoed from every corner as Shu Kai walked in, wearing a simple black suit with no tie. His hair was styled softly, his smile polite but distant. Fans screamed his name. The audience clapped. But something about him felt off. It was in the way he walked, the way he avoided eye contact, the way he sat down and immediately gripped the armrest like he was trying to stay grounded. The host began with the usual questions about his new projects, his upcoming drama, his experience filming abroad, and Shu Kai answered them all with grace. But his eyes kept drifting downward, his smile slipping for half a second here and there. The host, noticing the tension, decided to pivot and asked gently about Tan Songyun and how she was doing. And that was the moment everything changed. Shu Kai looked up, and for a second, he didn't speak. His lips parted, but no words came. Then, with a small, sharp breath, he said softly, "She is my whole world, and I almost lost her more than once." The studio fell silent. The host leaned forward, unsure if he should speak, but Shu Kai continued, his voice beginning to shake. "I know people look at us and think we are lucky, that we are happy, that we are perfect. But they don't know what it took to get here. They don't know what we went through. And maybe they never will, unless I finally say it." He paused again, this time looking directly at the camera. "I have lied to so many people, including myself. I have smiled when I wanted to scream. I have shown up to work with tears still drying on my face. I have looked into her eyes and seen disappointment and fear because of what I had done. And I told myself it would get better, and sometimes it did. But sometimes it got worse, and I hated myself for every second I made her feel unloved." A soft gasp rippled through the audience. The host hesitated, then asked, "Are you talking about the time you separated?" Shu Kai nodded slowly. "Yes. But also before that. And even after that. We think that love is enough, but it is not. Not if you are carrying pain that you never spoke of. Not if you are haunted by your own past." And then, his voice cracked. "I never talked about my childhood. Never told anyone that my father used to disappear for days, and that my mother cried herself to sleep most nights. I never told anyone that I learned to lie before I learned to love, that I learned to hide my feelings because no one ever cared enough to ask about them. And when I met Songyun, she was so full of light, and I was terrified that I would destroy her without meaning to. And maybe I did, a little." A tissue was passed from the crew as his tears began to fall, and he did not wipe them away. "When she told me she was pregnant, I smiled. But I panicked inside. Not because I didn't want the baby, I did, with all my heart, but because I didn't know how to be a father when I had never really had one. I didn't know how to raise a child without ruining them. Without making them feel small or invisible or scared. I wanted to run. I almost did, more than once." The audience sat frozen. The host, too caught in the moment, did not interrupt. "But she stayed," he said through trembling lips. "She stayed through my silence, through my outbursts, through my fear. And she never once used my past against me. She just waited for me to be brave enough to speak. And tonight, I am speaking. Because I want my child to grow up knowing that their father is not perfect, but is trying every day to be better." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small folded paper. "This was the first letter I wrote to my unborn child, the day we made peace after our big fight," he said. "I never meant to read it out loud, but maybe I need to." And then he began to read, his voice shaking with every word. "Dear little one. The day your mother forgave me, I cried in the shower for 30 minutes, because I could not believe someone like me deserved love like that. I have made mistakes, more than I can count. But I will never make the mistake of letting you feel unloved. You are the proof that good things can come from broken hearts. And I will spend the rest of my life holding yours safely in mine." When he finished, the paper was soaked in tears, and the audience was silent. Still, no one clapped. "Not yet." The host cleared his throat and asked gently, "Why are you sharing this now?" Shu Kai looked up and said, "Because, for the first time in my life, I want to stop performing. I want to be real. And I want people to understand that fame doesn't protect you from pain, that success doesn't mean you are whole, and that love is not a fairy tale. It is a choice 1,000 times over to show up and try, even when it hurts." The host nodded and asked, "What do you hope people will take away from this?" He took a deep breath and replied, "I hope they call their mothers. I hope they forgive someone they have been holding a grudge against. I hope they look at their partners and say, 'I am here, even when it is hard.' I hope they stop pretending and start healing. Because this world needs more truth, more softness, more men willing to say, 'I am not okay, but I am trying.'" At that moment, the host turned to the audience and asked if anyone wanted to speak. Slowly, one woman stood up in the back, her voice shaking as she said, "Thank you. I lost my husband 2 years ago, and I never heard him say half the things you just said. I think he wanted to. I think he just never knew how. But I know he would be proud of you tonight." Shu Kai covered his face and sobbed openly. The studio dimmed the lights out of respect, and not a single dry eye remained. The cameras had stopped rolling. The lights had dimmed. But nothing felt quiet. The audience was still seated, still frozen, as Shu Kai wiped the tears from his face and tried to breathe again. His hands were shaking, but his heart was clearer than it had been in years. He had said it. All of it. Or at least enough to finally feel lighter. The kind of lighter that only comes after carrying something for too long. Backstage, no one spoke. Staff members moved gently around him. The host gave him a soft pat on the shoulder but said nothing. There were no jokes now, no headlines read off cue cards. There was only Shu Kai, silent and trembling, holding onto the crumpled letter he had read out loud in front of millions. The very letter that had opened a wound so deep and yet so healing. His phone buzzed non-stop in his pocket. Messages from people he had not spoken to in years. His manager. Industry friends. Cousins. Co-stars. It was too much. He didn't check any of them. He stepped out into the night and drove home without saying a word to anyone. When he entered the apartment, it was dimly lit. No sign of chaos. No sign of joy either. Just a quiet that wrapped itself around him the moment he closed the door. His eyes found her before his feet did. Tan Songyun was sitting on the sofa in her favorite robe, her hands gently resting on her belly, her eyes glassy from tears she hadn't tried to hide. He didn't speak. He couldn't. But he dropped his bag and walked straight to her, falling to his knees at her feet. "I'm sorry," he whispered. She looked down at him, reached out, and tucked a strand of his hair behind his ear. "You were brave," she said softly. "You were so brave." He looked up. "I thought you'd be angry. That I said too much. That I shared things we were supposed to keep between us." Tan shook her head. "You said the things that people need to hear. Things I needed to hear. From you. And maybe from someone like you." He leaned his head against her belly. "I don't want our child to grow up wondering who I am. I want them to know. The real me. Not the one on stage. Not the one in photos." "They will," she said. "Because now you're not hiding anymore." They sat in that quiet for hours. No television. No phones. Just their breathing. And the soft, occasional flutter from the baby reminding them both that life was waiting not to be perfect, but to be honest. By the next morning, everything had changed. The video had been shared over 20 million times. It was translated into multiple languages. On platforms across the world, people were watching Shu Kai break down and share his truth, and they were crying right along with him. Celebrities reposted the clip. Advocacy groups applauded him for shedding light on mental health, fatherhood, and emotional suppression among men. Articles popped up in places he had never imagined. He was no longer just a trending actor. He had become something much more rare, a voice. But not all the voices were kind. Some industry insiders accused him of weaponizing vulnerability for attention. Others called it career suicide. A few scoffed at the display of emotion and called him unstable. The harsh comments were a whisper compared to the roar of support, but still, they lingered. Tan noticed the way his smile changed whenever he scrolled through his phone. She walked over one afternoon and took the device from his hand. "You didn't cry for them," she said. "You cried for you. Remember that." He nodded. "But what if it ruins everything? My work, my brand, our peace?" She sat beside him and took his hand. "Then we build again. From scratch if we have to. I'd rather have a real man with no sponsors than a hollow one with millions." That night, they stayed up late, writing more letters to their child. Each letter a testament to the messy, beautiful world the baby was about to enter. They didn't hold back anymore. Not with each other. Not with themselves. If there was pain, they talked about it. If there was fear, they wrote about it. And in doing so, they healed one sentence at a time. 3 days after the broadcast, Shu Kai received a letter in the mail. No signature. Just a single page. It read, "I watched your tears and saw my own reflection. I have a son I haven't spoken to in 10 years. Tonight, I called him. Thank you." He read it aloud to Tan, and they both sat in stunned silence. That was the moment Shu Kai realized this wasn't just about him anymore. His pain had opened doors for others. His healing had become a map for those still lost. They decided to do something neither of them had ever done before. A joint live session. Just the two of them. No host. No questions. Just them, talking to whoever wanted to listen. It wasn't planned. They didn't even tell their management. They went live at midnight. Within minutes, over 200,000 people had joined. Shu Kai sat beside Tan, her hand in his, and they told the story not of their fame, but of their fall. The fight that nearly ended them. The quiet mornings after. The therapy sessions. The night he almost packed a suitcase and left. The night she cried and whispered, "Please stay. I can't do this alone." They talked. They laughed. They cried again. Viewers from all over the world flooded the comment section with their own stories, their own apologies, their own truths. When they ended the live session an hour later, Tan turned to Shu Kai and said, "That felt like church." "It felt like freedom," he replied. From that moment on, they no longer tried to protect an image. They shared the truth, no matter how unpolished. When Tan began struggling with back pain, she posted a video of Shu Kai trying to massage her shoulders and failing hilariously. When Shu Kai felt overwhelmed by work offers after the show, he posted a simple photo of himself holding a notebook with the words "one thing at a time" written on the cover. They had become, somehow, symbols of real love. Not the glossy kind, but the cracked kind. The kind that held on. The kind that grew roots. One afternoon, Tan received a letter that changed everything. It was from Shu Kai's estranged father. He had seen the broadcast. And for the first time in over 15 years, he wanted to talk. Shu Kai didn't know what to do. He paced the apartment for hours. What if he wants to apologize? What if he doesn't? What if it just opens the wound again? Tan sat him down. "Then we let it. Because healing means bleeding a little first." They arranged the meeting in private. No media. No photos. Just a park, a bench, and a man who once disappeared.